All right, folks. Welcome, Science Freedom Florida here. Shout out to Clay County and to all of Florida, and to anybody else who happens to be watching from around the United States. Tonight we're going to continue our examination of the recently adopted 2018 biology textbook for Clay County schools, and we're going to focus entirely on the word theory as they define it in the textbook, and then associate that with the idea of evolution. And I've argued this before. I've argued it back at the time of the school board meeting. I argued it in some of my earlier videos, and I'm going to make this argument here, and I'm going to kind of show that the way that the so-called scientific community uses the word theory has changed over time, that it doesn't mean today for them what it has meant to everybody, how we were taught in schools, how I was taught in school, and that it's actually inconsistent the way that it's spoken about. When they say theory, what they actually mean is model, and it's all of the stuff that is accumulated as a hypothesis gets tested and is supposed to turn a hypothesis into a theory. The way that it's even worded in multiple places. I was doing some research a little bit earlier, and I was looking it up on all of the quote-unquote enemy websites. And the way that they used the words hypothesis and theory together showed that they are a transition. Hypothesis is a transition to theory. So anyway, that's what we get into. What I want to do first is I want to read the way the book uses it, and there's a lot to it. It's almost the whole page. I don't want to read the whole page, so I'm probably going to kind of hit just some highlights here. I will post the page so that nobody thinks I'm trying to pull something over on the listeners or anything. You can read the whole text for yourself, but I want to hit some of the highlights and show where the usage of the word theory is inconsistent. Now, I actually don't have as much problem with the way that the word theory is used on this page as I do with the way that it's kind of ignored. The way that they define it here is kind of ignored for the rest of the book, especially when we're talking about evolution. So that's a part of that inconsistency. So I'm going to read this, and then I'll get into the specifics here in a minute. It says, a theory explains a wide range of observations. The meaning of a word may change depending on the context in which it is used. The word theory has different meanings. In everyday conversation, the word theory means a guess or a hunch. In science, the meaning of the word theory is very different. A theory is a proposed explanation for a wide range of observations and experimental results that is supported by a wide range of evidence. Recall that a hypothesis is a proposed answer to a scientific question. Hypotheses about natural and physical phenomena that have been tested over a wide variety of conditions are incorporated into theories. For example, natural selection is a scientific theory. It is supported by a large amount of data and explains how populations can evolve. Hypotheses propose answers to scientific questions. Scientific theories provide explanations of phenomena. I'm going to stop right there. I want to show this inconsistency here. A hypothesis is very small. The very idea behind a hypothesis is that it is very small. It is a proposed answer to a question. And when we answer a question, that question might be what, it might be how, when, why. There's a number of ways we can ask questions, but when we talk about a hypothesis, it's very important to understand that to test for a hypothesis in science, you have to test true or false. True or false. That's all there can be, and so it has to be very precise, which generally means it has to be very small and relatively simple. That doesn't mean it can't be about complex things, but it means that the hypothesis is usually a single premise. It's usually a single statement. For instance, if we were to talk about the hypothesis of dropping two objects off of a tall tower, let's say we dropped a brick and a baseball, and the brick is significantly more massive and weird shaped than a baseball, we might hypothesize that between those two objects that the brick is going to hit first. And of course, those of you who know anything about physics know that barring any kind of wind resistance questions, they're actually going to hit at the same time. And so that hypothesis would be false. And then we could make a hypothesis that says that, welcome to all those people that are showing up. Caitlin and Jackie, Stephen, Andrea, good to see you here. But anyway, we might make a hypothesis that says that, well, it doesn't matter that what the mass is or what the size or the shape is or whatever. If we can ignore wind resistance, talking about gravity alone, then it doesn't matter what we drop off. If we drop them off from the same height at the same time, they're going to hit at the same time. And we test that hypothesis, and there's even a video on YouTube that I show that I've shown in recent years. These guys have a huge chamber for training astronauts that they can suck a lot of the air out of it, make it near vacuum, and they drop a group of feathers in a bowling ball, and lo and behold, they hit at the same time. It's a great video. If you get a chance, look it up. But that's a hypothesis. It's small and precise, and it's tested for falsifiability. If you get something large and unwieldy, you can no longer test it for there's no way to falsify something that's big and complex like that. All right, so they're saying here in the book, hypotheses propose answers to scientific questions, and they talk about how a hypothesis can be tested, and then they talk about how hypotheses can explain. Hypotheses explain answers. And so we understand that a hypothesis, after it's gathered a body of data behind it, after testing has been done, and we haven't proven it false yet, then that's how a hypothesis develops into a theory. Is now that same premise. Maybe we've modified the wording a little bit, but the idea is still the same. And it's now got this body of data behind it called the model, the theoretical model, that moves it up to this idea of theory. And that's where this idea of, it's explanatory comes from. But the theory is still the simple falsifiable premise. If it wasn't, you can't ever prove a theory false. But you can, and they'll admit that. If you look it up on just what's the difference between hypothesis, theory, and law. Of course, half the sites that come up on the first page in Google are going to be defending evolution, because they have to be relentless about that. But if you look at them, the theories, they talk about them as something that if you can't falsify a theory, then it's not scientific according to them, and that's where they attack things that would relate more to like religion and stuff. God's not falsifiable, and you can't put God in a test tube and stuff like that. And so that's their argument, is that a theory is falsifiable. The only way that a theory can be falsifiable if it's as simple and precise as the original hypothesis. And that doesn't mean it's the same. It might be worded better. It might be a little bit more precise. It might be starting to take equation form even. But it's still the essential primary thought. Okay, so skipping down a little bit, let's see here. All right, in contrast to hypotheses and theories, I actually didn't skip it all. I'm starting right where I left off. In contrast to hypotheses and theories, a scientific law defines relationships that are valid everywhere in the universe. For example, the law of conservation of energy states that energy may change form, but it can't be created or destroyed. A law describes without providing any explanations. Well, what do you think a description does? A description is an explanation of the relationship between matter and energy, between time and space. It's a distinction without a difference. They're using different words, But a law is just as explanatory as the hypothesis and theory, and it's just as precise and probably more precise, but it's still something that we can say, yes, this is true, no, this is false. The difference between a theory and a law is that the law has been tested so many times and shown to be universally true that it's not logically possible that it's false. We have come to discover a truth about the universe, and that's what a law is it's a known truth about the universe. And theories, they're not known to be true, and the book's going to admit that here in a minute when we get down a little bit further. But one thing I want to go back up to is in this first paragraph, it talks about the everyday conversation. Why is it? And you can go look at these websites. I told you, go look up hypothesis, theory, and law. What's the difference? And you're going to see in these links, this keeps coming up to scientists all the time. People keep asking, when does a theory become a law and stuff like that? Why do people keep asking that question? Where does that question even come from? Why do they have it in their minds that a theory graduates to a law? Well, the answer is that at least up until I was in high school, which was late 80s and the early 90s, theory was taught properly. It was taught that a theory was a hypothesis that had been tested a reasonable number of times and hadn't been proven false yet, and it collected some data that related to it that provided some good evidence that it might be true. Well, then if you collected enough data and enough people were researching it, and you eliminated all the possibility of it being false, if you discovered that it was true, that's when theory graduated to law. And usually that was when it became an equation. That's how we learned it. Most of the people who are my age and a little bit young or a little bit older, that's how we learned the scientific method. That's how we learned about those three words, hypothesis, theory, and law, were stages. But long around the end of the 20th century, heading into the 2000s and certainly the last decade, the scientific community has really felt pressure from those who deny things like evolution and climate change and some of these others. David Campbell brought up all of the controversial topics. And of course, those of us who disagree with him aren't really scientists. Yeah, because they get to say who's a scientist and who's not. But they started changing the meaning of the words. I mean, not maybe on the level of the 1984 type stuff, but they've started changing the way that the official definitions, because they need to get away from the idea that evolution is never going to become a law, because they'll never prove it to be true. They cannot prove it to be true. There's just no evidence to prove it to be true. And so that's one of the big ones is, it stays a theory, perpetually a theory for them, because it's never going to be accepted as a law. No one's going to accept it as the law of evolution because it's got too many questions behind it. Okay? But that's part of the cumulative evidence against this idea of the word theory being this vast, explanatory monster with all of these parts to it. And that's not what a theory really is. A theory is just a simple, precise statement that happens to have a model behind it in the form of all that experimentation and data that they keep talking about. But it's still got to be falsifiable, and you can't do that with a big unwieldy creature like that. It's like fighting a boss battle in a video game. You got to knock off this piece, and you got to knock off that piece, and eventually you knock off 1,000 pieces, and you get down to the final form, and finally you can falsify. And that's not how it works. You should be able to say this theory is false because, and then be done with it. And so I think that's a huge part of it. But I want to keep going here. Laws describe, but laws also explain. Newton's laws of motion explain how objects move. We talk about the law of inertia. An object in motion tends to stay in motion. An object at rest tends to stay at rest unless there's an outside force applied to it. That explains, that answers a question. There's the hypothesis part. It explains how motion works for objects related to velocity and forces applied. Okay, related to changes in velocity, which is acceleration, and forces applied. So there's an explanation there. And for them to say, well, it's not a theory, it's not the same thing as a theory because it only describes, it doesn't explain. What does that even mean? I mean, they're making a difference that doesn't really exist between those two ideas. They explain just fine. And I challenge them on their superfine distinction there that just doesn't really exist. Okay, so let's move on to the next paragraph. Theories are not easily accepted in science, and by definition, they are never proved. This is from the book. This is directly from the textbook. Theories are not easily accepted in science. I would challenge that. And by definition, they are never proved. Well, if you can't ever prove it to be true, why are you teaching it in schools? It's a good question. And so, if we can't ever prove it to be true, can we ever falsify it? And if you can't falsify it, is it scientific according to their own definitions? No. And so this one statement right here means that anything that is a theory, that's in this textbook that's a theory, is by definition, by their definition, not scientific. It shouldn't be taught in the scientific classroom or in the science classroom. It's just not. But they're contradictory, they're self-contradictory, as all false things are. They end up being self-contradictory, and they really just should be discarded. Now, that's not saying that we should discard scientific theory as an idea, but it needs to be properly defined as a hypothesis, that precisely stated premise that's still falsifiable, that does have that supporting data or that model behind it. And then if you gather enough data, then you can eliminate all of the possibilities of it being wrong. You can prove it to be true. I'm one of these people that believes in objective truth. I believe that truth is knowable. The very idea of science, the word science means to know. I'm not a postmodernist. I believe you can know things. Okay? That's been ingrained in me my whole life through teaching, through my own experimentation, through experience, everything in my... hey, Shauna, welcome aboard. Cameron, all kinds of people. Glad to have you here. But through my entire life, truth is knowable, and it is an objective thing. It doesn't care how I feel about it. And I'm teaching math this year. I haven't taught math in a while, but I'm teaching math this year, and it's so pure. And it's so amazing to get back to this idea of 2 plus 2 is 4. That is the identity of 2 plus 2 is 4. We know that to be true. There's no doubt about it. I don't have to search the universe to find an exception to that. It's just this pure truth. So truth is knowable. Laws are knowable. Theories are falsifiable. And so if we end up saying what the textbook is saying, then they're just contradicting themselves over and over and over again. It says eventually a theory may be broadly accepted by the scientific community. Because truth is democratic? Raise your hand if you believe in evolution. Evolution must be true. The majority of scientists said so. That's not how truth works. You know, when we look at the heliocentric model of the universe. Now, barring the quibble about the fact that the sun is not technically the center of the solar system, there's a gravitational center that's sometimes within the sun and sometimes without. But practically speaking, the sun is closest to the center, and it's certainly not the Earth. I know there's going to be some people that would give me grief over that, so I'm going to clarify. But when Copernicus was bringing up his idea that the Earth wasn't the center of the solar system, He was an army of one. He was the only one that believed his model. Of course, he got his buddy Galileo in on it, and then Johann Kepler, and then slowly it kind of caught on. But he defied the Catholic Church during his day and suffered for it. Put under house arrest. Of course, they apologized in the 20th century. It was very nice of them to do that. But anyway, Copernicus is the prime example of truth, at least as they could come to understand it with their technology. Truth that the Earth was not the center of the solar system, it wasn't the center of the galaxy, wasn't the center of the universe. That truth was only known by one person. And everybody else, all of the scientists of his day, disagreed with him. Well, here we are talking about how theories might be accepted by the majority of scientists. Al Gore used this in his An Inconvenient Lie movie. He kept talking about how there's no disagreement in the scientific community, and he used some bad statistical data to show that there was 100% agreement among climatologists that global warming is true. Well, no, that was not true. But even if it was, that doesn't make it true. Scientific, the guys that are studying it, it's not about consensus. Consensus doesn't make something true. Evidence makes it true. We come to know things about the universe because that's what the evidence demands us to come to that conclusion. There is no evidence, none, that demands the conclusion that evolution is true. I don't know how many people I've talked to about it. And they'll hem and they'll haw and they'll talk about what about this and what about that. But those pieces of evidence are not things that demand that evolution is true. Fossils don't demand the conclusion that evolution is true. The only conclusion that fossils demand is that something died. That's all there is to it. They can't even prove that a fossil was part of a hereditary chain. We don't know that the animal whose fossil we have ever reproduced. And yet they want to say, well, that's part of an evolutionary change from a single-celled organism to where we are now. Hey. The wife is coming to spy on me.
Are you making a video?
I am. I'm doing a live video.
I was making sure you weren't making one with the vacuum cleaner.
Oh my goodness, with the vacuum cleaner. She's ragging on me because I was considering.
Who are you talking to?
It's live. It's a live video.
Oh.
I'm talking to people about science.
The interwebs.
Yes, to the interweb. All right, you want to say hi? All right, say hi.
Hey, what's up? How many people you got watching? Where's the little number?
I don't know. I've got all these people that have come on.
I am watching a live video, but not yours.
Right, your business.
My team's.
Right. Okay. So I'm gonna do this thing. I'm getting there. I'm almost done.
I don't care.
It's getting a little warm out here, so.
I'm good.
All right. Love you.
Love you.
Anyway, so let's move on with this. Scientific hypotheses and theories may be supported or refuted, and they are always subject to change. Well, we know evolution's kind of fluid. New theories that better explain observations and experimental results can replace older theories. Scientists must always be willing to revise theories and conclusions as new evidence about the living world is gathered. Science is an ongoing process. New experiments and observations refine and expand scientific knowledge. And that is the case. I don't have any problems with that as stated. Where I will have the problem is that they don't actually do that practically. When their pet theories, when those controversial topics come up, they don't practice that. They hold on tenaciously. Perfect example of that is the Ernst Haeckel drawings. You get into what Ernst Haeckel did. He admitted that he had fudged those drawings of recapitulation, going from what he called early gestation, which wasn't early at all, but he said it was early gestation and eventually to the point of either hatching or birth or whatever, and he showed that there were similarities, and that showed that we undergo evolution through our gestation period. He admitted that those were fakes. We know that a lot of the ones that he drew were actually from the same mold. He just took the same animal and copied it. and then he altered it a little bit because he was a very talented artist. And that was a lie that was found out almost immediately, and yet it has been in our textbooks as a pillar of evolution for over 100 years. They hold on to these things. They don't let them go. And because the public doesn't really study deep into it, unless you got nerds like me doing it, the population just accepts it. Oh, it's in public school. It must be true. And that's not to say that most of these teachers are lying. Most of these teachers went through the public school system, and they got the same indoctrination that they're now passing on to the next generation. That's how it works. And you have just some people who know better. And there's articles. There are articles that have been written by some of these guys who have a fit of conscience, and they write an article about how the Ernst Haeckel stuff was a lie, or the moth thing was a lie, or how many of these other things are lies or circular reasoning, and they just don't fit what these guys have said they are. So anyway, going to continue on with this. Let's see here. They get into germ theory, bloodletting, and all of that. And I do agree with this statement. Viruses and prions are not living organisms. There's a big to-do about that, but I go with the whole viruses are not alive. And I could go into why, but I don't really care to do that right now. And I think that's it. We're going to get into scientific inquiry and stuff on the rest of the page. But that's the gist of tonight's video, is this idea of theory. They constantly are inconsistent with the way they use the word theory. And I'm telling you, it doesn't make sense if you try to consistently apply their definition. It doesn't make sense, because then if we use their definition, you can't falsify it. And they say that it's explanatory. They say hypotheses are explanatory. Well, then when we started exploring laws, what did they start out as? And it's not that laws are immediately observable and we just look and oop, there it is, we got a law. They have to be researched through the scientific method just like everything else. And so that means they have to start off as a hypothesis. And once they start off as a hypothesis, if hypotheses are answers and explanations, that means a law has to be as well. So it's a quibble. It's a kind of an end around. It's a fake, where they're changing the meanings of these words so that they don't ever have to graduate evolution or any of these other nonsense things to law. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. I want to end again. Of course, we're in election cycle, and I want to end again with shout outs to Latanya Peterson, Ashley Gilhausen, and Betsy Condon. Miss Peterson is running for the Janice Karecki's spot. She's up for re-election this time, and Miss Peterson is running for that spot. So we definitely hope that she will win that contest. And then Ashley Gilhausen and Betsy Condon are already on the school board, and we're hoping that they retain those seats, because if they don't, the changes in Clay County are not going to be good. And it's not going to be just this science stuff. It's going to be a whole lot of stuff that's going to be bad. So if you're watching this and you're in Clay County, if you haven't voted, go out and vote. Those are the three that I recommend that you vote for. Those are the three I voted for. If you are in Clay County and you've already voted or you haven't, share this video. Go to their pages, engage with them, ask them questions. All three are very honest, very kind women. They love talking about the things that they want to bring to Clay County. They're not vicious. They don't want to attack their opponents. Their main focus is on what they can do for the county, and you'll just see a stark difference between the two types of candidates that we have running for this school board election. So please get out and vote. Be educated, and if you agree with choice, if you agree with having kids critically think and learn to be independent thinkers, then these are the three ladies you need to vote for. So I wish them the best. And election is August 28th. That's the actual day of the election. and we're in early voting up until the 25th. I hope I got that right. But please get out and vote. And as always, guys, keep learning. Thank you for watching.